I got rabies shots for biting the head off of a bat. But that's okay. The bat had to get Aussie shots. Ozzy Osbourne. Welcome to the world of bats, the only flying mammals on Earth. Sure, there are flying squirrels and sugar gliders, but those are just imposters. Bats, more than any other animal, probably have done more good and ill towards us humans simultaneously. On one hand, they pollinate our crops and eat insects. And on the other hand, they tend to spread disease. They're in fact reservoir hosts for a variety of diseases that harm humans and other mammals. Bats, just acting on their own volition, simultaneously have saved and ended human lives. I would argue that no other animal has a more complex relationship with us than the bat. Bats are one of the world's most unusual creatures on the planet. They're incredibly diverse, ranging from tiny creatures only more than 1 inch to flying foxes of Southeast Asia with wingspans stretching to over 1.5 meters. The latter of the two are by and large known by the name of megabats, which sounds like some sort of 1980s crappy action movie. This group is unsurprisingly far larger. Most of them eat fruit, mushrooms, mold, nectar, and even wood. They play a crucial role in pollinating flower plants, along with crops. Some crops, like the durian fruit, a Southeast Asian fruit that tastes like ice cream while smelling like shit, is nearly completely dependent on the pollination by bats. They are the most common in Southeast Asia and Australia. However, due to their ability to fly, they can be found throughout much of the tropics of the Old World as well. Most of these nocturnal animals are awake during the nighttime, or possibly during dawn and dusk, kind of like cats. Most of the larger bats are not capable of echolocation, as their sense of sight is not too bad, and their sense of smell is also pretty good. With heads that kind of look like foxes, many of these are referred to as flying foxes. Even though they more closely resemble foxes, and it's a cool name, they aren't foxes. They're bats. But, to be fair to them, unlike most bats, they are not ugly as sin. Just compare the face of that flying fox to the face of some other bats. The flying fox's large size makes them a target for bushmeat, though, which has given the bats a bad reputation for being reservoir hosts for many viruses and other pathogens. And this places the people eating them in grave danger. I'll go into more depth about the relationship between bats and the coof later on. However, at the end of the day, these large bats have not played any significant role in the Western imagination compared to their smaller relatives, the microbats, as the large ones by and large are relegated to the tropics of Africa, India, Southeast Asia, etc. Most iconography, stories, and cultural symbolism of the bat, at least in the West, are relegated to microbats. This is where most of the iconic cultural elements of the human-bat relationship come from, at least in parts of the world where most of you reside in. Most of these bats are insectivores, eating large sums of insects. Some of the larger varieties of microbats will also eat vertebrates. Contrary to popular belief, though, the vast majority of bats have no interest in sucking your blood. If you don't live in Latin America, then you have nothing to fear from vampire bats. And even if you live south of the Rio Grande, those vampire bats usually feed off of the blood of sleeping livestock like cattle, or perhaps some species of birds. While vampire bats can suck human blood, this is pretty atypical, as humans tend to sleep indoors, and we have pretty good reflexes. Nonetheless, you probably wouldn't want to be eaten by a vampire bat unless you think dying from rabies is fun. Nonetheless, microbats provide a very important role for humankind. While large bats play an important role for pollinating crops due to their fruit and fungi consumption, microbats play an essential role for eating the vast sums of insects, such as mosquitoes and others that are vectors for diseases. This leads to a complex relationship between humans, bats, insects, and microscopic pathogens. On one hand, bats are major vectors for diseases that kill many humans, but on the other hand, they eat mosquitoes, which spread far more diseases and kill far more humans than bats could ever dream of. Bats play another important functional role for humans, namely through the power of their shit. Yeah, bat shit is oftentimes called guano, from Spanish, kind of like bird shit, a white mixture of piss and poo. While not the most beautiful sight, guano is converted to fertilizer, as it's rich in phosphate and potassium. While a lot of guano extraction comes from seabirds off of islands, Bat poo oftentimes is extracted from caves. Given the fact that bats eat a lot of insects, which are rich in nutrients, guano makes excellent fertilizer for crops. This has led to a mining industry based off of bat shit. The only issue is that unlike, say, gold or emeralds, this resource can lead to the spread of disease. Spreading of disease ever since the Great Coof of 2019, 2020, and 2021, and parts of 2022. Bats have been the subject of derision due to their reputation as being virus reservoirs. Arguably more than any other vertebrate, bats are responsible for the spread of deadly pathogens such as Ebola, rabies, and other various zoonotic diseases. They are referred to as reservoir hosts because they oftentimes infect other animals, which in turn infect humans. The middle stage animals are oftentimes called carrier hosts. Notable examples of this phenomenon are SARS during the 2000s, which probably came from an Asian civet, or MERS, the camel flu, which was caused by a pathogen from the coronavirus family spread to humans via camels, and those camels got it from bats. And of course, there's COVID-19, which I'm going to avoid the subject by and large because it's been talked to death. While there are many theories about whether it came from a lab or just some sort of bat, one origin story may involve a wet market in Wuhan in which a bat infected a pangolin, which in turn infected the human patient zero. To be clear, we don't know for sure, and I'm not going to take any sort of strong stance until I see concrete evidence. We don't really know why bats are reservoir hosts, but there are a number of explanations. For one, bats are a very diverse group of mammals. They are the most diverse outside of rodents, so it's far more likely to be a source of viruses based off of their raw numbers. Two, they're very social, which makes pathogens very easy to spread from one to the other. And three, they fly. This requires a lot of oxygen and very high metabolism compared to other mammals, which can't fly. The constant flapping of wings and high amounts of energy needed to continue flying means that they undergo a great deal of muscle damage, and they need to have that tissue repaired. Their bodies have to repair that damage, and this resulted in a very strong immune system. An immune system that can actually withstand a great deal of viruses. To be clear, there is more research that needs to be done. Probably as a result of their ability to spread disease, their nocturnal activity, clumsy flying, and just all-around ugliness, bats have oftentimes gotten a negative reputation in various human cultures. And given that bats exist nearly everywhere outside of the polar regions and oceans, this means that nearly every culture has some sort of story or perspective on bats. Even some of the most isolated parts of the world, like Madagascar and New Zealand, have bats. From Mesoamerica to Africa, they have oftentimes been associated with evil spirits and monsters. My favorite story of evil bats comes from East Africa, in which a bat that looks like a monster basically assaults human victims. Western culture, while not associating bats with, let's just say, backdoor assaults, have made them icons of fear, terror, and despair. We are all aware of the stories of vampires and Batman, neither of whom need any further explanation. They have also been staples of Halloween decor. Bats have also influenced human philosophy. Thomas Nagel, a very prominent philosopher, wrote an essay called "What is it like to be a bat?" Nagel has used the bat to illustrate various problems with our idea of consciousness and subjective experiences within objective reality. He uses bats as a subject, as bats experience the world subjectively in a way that is vastly different than humans. Most bats have extremely poor eyesight by human standards, and therefore can't conceive of vivid colors like we can. Since we're not awake at the night, we are diurnal creatures who rely on color through light. Bats hear ultrasonic waves, so their understanding of sound is also vastly different. Many bats understand the world through echolocation, which oftentimes involves using sonar. Sonar stands for sound navigation and ranging. This leads to returning sound waves, which help the bat detect prey, branches, caves, predators, and etc. A human can read endlessly about bat anatomy, physiology, ecology, habitats, and etc., but they would never be able to experience what it's truly like to be a bat. Any information you learn would come from your eyes via observation of the wild, or reading about bats, or watching a documentary about bats, or a mediocre YouTube video like this one about bats. All visual and audio, which is what humans do to understand the world. This would not give you an understanding of what it's truly like to be a bat, flying around nearly blind, hearing frequencies totally different from what we're used to, and using sonar to detect the world around you without even touching or looking at anything. Perhaps that's the main reason why bats terrify us. They're creatures we can truly never empathize with, no matter how we try.